think about the last time a really talented colleague of yours just suddenly quit.
Oh, yeah. That's always a shock.
Right. Everyone is gathered around the proverbial water cooler, and they're absolutely stunned. People are saying, wow, that really came out of nowhere. I had no idea they were unhappy.
Mm.
But if we actually look closer, did it really come out of nowhere? Today, we're doing a deep dive into this massive, incredibly comprehensive breakdown by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover.
Yeah, it's called The Quiet Exit, Leadership Failures and Employee Retention.
Exactly. And what the research proves is that a resignation, well, it almost never comes out of nowhere. It's rarely this sudden snap decision, and surprisingly enough, it's rarely purely about the money.
It's actually a fascinating slow burn. I mean, instead of a single explosive event, someone leaving a job is usually the result of these tiny, almost invisible micro moments of leadership failure that just kind of compound over time.
Yeah, they really add up.
They do. And we are going to look closely at both the what and the why of this modern workplace exodus. Because if you understand the, frankly, staggering true cost of this turnover.
Oh, the costs are wild.
Right. And you look under the hood at the actual psychology behind why we mentally check out of our roles long before we ever pack up our desks, well, it changes how you view employment entirely. We'll be examining the specific evidence-based frameworks that major companies use to stop this brain drain before the damage is even done.
I think anyone who has ever had a job or, managed a team is going to immediately recognize themselves in this data. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with this absolute myth of the sudden departure.
Yeah, the sudden departure is definitely a myth.
Right, because Dr. Westover's research points to something called the unfolding model of turnover. So what is actually happening in the background when someone seems to just abruptly hand in their 2 weeks' notice?
Well, the unfolding model fundamentally shifts how we view the timeline of quitting. Historically, organizations treated quitting as a linear, relatively short path, like you get unhappy, you start looking for a job, you find one, you quit.
Right, step 1, 2, 3.
Exactly. But behavioral research shows it is much more nuanced and drawn out. There is a really critical difference between observable turnover, which is the day your colleague actually hands in that resignation letter, and turnover intention.
Turnover intention.
Right. Turnover intention is that internal psychological state where you begin seriously considering leaving. And that intention usually precedes the actual action by weeks, months, or sometimes even years.
So wait, during that time, they aren't necessarily sending out their resume every single night, like actively trying to escape.
Precisely. Researchers refer to this phase as the passive job search.
Passive job search. Okay.
Yeah. You aren't aggressively applying to job boards, but your radar is up. If a recruiter reaches out to you with an interesting message on LinkedIn, or, a former colleague mentions an opening at their new company over drinks, you are highly receptive.
So you're basically vulnerable to being poached.
Exactly. You are essentially vulnerable. And this is exactly where the financial shock to an organization begins to snowball. Because when that passive search quietly turns into an active exit, the costs are just monumental.
Yeah, I was reading the stats on this.
Right, like the data from Society for Human Resource Management, they estimate that replacing a departing employee costs between 50% and 200% of their annual salary.
Wait, 200%? Like, if you have an employee making $100,000 a year, it costs the company $200,000 just to replace them. I mean, that sounds impossibly high.
It is entirely real, especially for specialized technical or leadership roles. The Center for American Progress synthesized a massive amount of data on this. And they found that while replacing a frontline worker making under $50,000 might cost about 20% of their salary.
Which is still a lot.
It is, but replacing those technical or executive positions frequently exceeds that 200% mark. And to understand why, you really have to think about what the company is actually paying for.
Right. It's not just a recruiter's fee.
Exactly. It's not just the recruiter. It is the cost of onboarding, the training, the sheer loss of momentum while that seat is empty, the strain on the rest of the team who has to cover the workload, and, the steep learning curve before the new hire is actually producing value.
The ripple effects must just absolutely devastate a department. Because the source highlighted this one specific example of a senior portfolio manager leaving a financial firm.
Oh, yes.
And when they walked out the door, it triggered $2.3 million in organizational costs. $2.3 million for one person.
It's staggering.
Right. And it wasn't just administrative stuff. It was delayed client onboarding, paying for temporary coverage, and a mandatory 6-month ramp-up period before the new hire could even touch certain accounts.
Exactly. And the impacts aren't limited to a spreadsheet. They bleed into the actual physical reality of the
Like
workplace.
safety issues.
Yes, exactly. In one manufacturing case study, they tracked what happened when experienced production supervisors left. For 6 straight months after the departure, physical safety incidents spiked, and product quality metrics noticeably declined.
Wow.
Yeah, the new supervisors just simply lacked the deep contextual knowledge, like the muscle memory, really, to spot the early warning signs of machinery problems or team fatigue. Plus, there's a very real phenomenon known as turnover contagion.
Turnover contagion, like a virus spreading through the cubicles.
That's a really good way to picture it, actually. When an anchor on your team leaves, the social fabric tears. The remaining team members immediately start reassessing their own situations.
Right, because they're taking on all the extra work.
Exactly. They are suddenly absorbing the extra work, morale drops, and they think, well, if Sarah's leaving, maybe I should be looking too. Suddenly, the whole department is in a passive job search.
Visualizing this whole unfolding model, it feels exactly like a long-term romantic breakup.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about it. You don't usually break up over that one final explosive argument about who was supposed to take out the trash.
Right.
That's just the observable departure. You break up because of the 6 previous months of unwashed dishes, the feeling of being totally ignored, the lack of communication. The trash was just the final trigger that caused the structural collapse.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly the organizational psychology data supports that exact human behavioral pattern.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The research points to a foundational concept called the psychological contract. And we need to be really clear here. This isn't the PDF of employment paperwork you signed with HR on your first day.
Right, not the literal contract.
Exactly. The psychological contract is the vast set of unwritten, implicit expectations between you and your employer. It's the invisible baseline expectation that your voice will be heard, that your career will have a trajectory, and that if you put in discretionary effort, it will be recognized and rewarded.
So it's the vibe. It's this mutual, unspoken understanding of reciprocity. Like, I give you my absolute best effort, and in return, you give me professional respect and a future here.
Yes, and this is exactly where those metaphorical unwashed dishes start piling up. Think about the micro moments.
Okay.
When a manager completely ignores an employee's idea during a brainstorming meeting or delays a promised conversation about a promotion for the 3rd month in a row, or excessively micromanages a project that the employee has successfully done a dozen times.
Which is the worst.
It is. Employees do not brush these off as just, oh, my boss is having a stressful week. They experience them on a subconscious level as fundamental breaches of that psychological contract.
Wait, I have to stop you there. Because if I'm listening to this and I manage a team, I'm thinking, okay, if I am genuinely slammed with a major deadline, operating on like 3 hours of sleep, and I just forget to validate someone's idea in one Tuesday morning meeting, my employee's brain is registering that as a literal violation of our employment contract. That feels a bit extreme, doesn't it?
It does sound intense when you isolate it like that. But remember, the brain is looking for patterns, not isolated incidents.
Okay, that makes sense.
One missed acknowledgement on a frantic Tuesday doesn't break the contract. But a consistent pattern of ideas going into a black hole absolutely does. It slowly erodes what researchers call psychological safety.
Ah, psychological safety.
Yeah, and psychological safety is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in modern business. It is not about everyone being universally nice to each other or avoiding difficult conversations.
Right.
True psychological safety is the core belief that you can speak candidly, take interpersonal risks, and make honest mistakes without the fear of being punished, marginalized, or humiliated by your team.
The source provided some incredible examples of how organizations actually build that safety rather than just, slapping it on a motivational poster in the break room.
Yes, the Mayo Clinic example is great.
Yeah, the Mayo Clinic implemented these structures called learning rounds. Doctors and nurses actively present past cases where their initial medical assessments were actually wrong.
Which takes a lot of guts.
It does. But because the entire exercise is framed around systemic learning rather than individual critique or blame, the ego threat is totally removed. And by doing that, they saw their voluntary turnover drop by an impressive 4 to 6%.
It is a brilliant structural fix because it targets the exact mechanism of fear. Healthcare professionals are understandably terrified of looking incompetent.
Of course.
By reframing a mistake as a system error to be solved collectively, you eliminate the punishment aspect of the psychological contract. Pixar Animation Studios does something very similar with their brain trust meeting.
Oh, right.
Yeah, when a director presents an in-progress film to a peer group, the corporate hierarchy is deliberately removed from the room. Creatives can speak their minds without defensive posturing.
So the executives aren't just dictating changes.
Exactly. The director still retains the final say on the film, which completely removes the threat of a hostile takeover of their project, but the candid, highly critical feedback flows freely. It systematically stops people from feeling unheard.
So if micro-failures and a lack of safety break the contract, how do companies systematically build micro-successes into the daily grind? Dr. Westover points to two massive pillars of retention, which are recognition and autonomy. And here's where it gets really interesting, because the data shows that the timing of recognition matters just as much as the recognition itself. A delayed thank you is almost as bad as no thank you.
The psychological feedback loop needs to be incredibly tight. Think about how our brains process reward, An immediate shout out for a specific positive behavior amplifies motivation and reinforces the psychological contract far more effectively than, say, handing someone a generic plaque at a quarterly award ceremony 3 months after the fact.
Yeah, a plaque 3 months later feels pretty hollow.
Exactly. Salesforce recognized this and built a platform called Trailhead. Employees earn digital badges for learning new skills or completing tough projects, and those badges are immediately visible to their peers and managers.
So it's instant validation.
Yes, it provides instant validation. Business units within Salesforce that heavily emphasized this rapid recognition saw their regretted attrition, which is losing people they really wanted to keep drop by 5 to 7%.
Southwest Airlines attacks this from a slightly different angle with their LUV awards. What makes it so effective is that it isn't top-down management handing out gold stars. It is peer nominated.
Which is huge.
Right. Flight attendants and ground staff nominate each other for specific behaviors. If you are on the front lines dealing with a delayed flight, angry passengers, lost luggage, and having a peer, someone who actually understands the chaos, say, hey, I saw how you de-escalated that situation, and you were amazing, it just carries an immense amount of psychological weight. Top-down recognition can sometimes feel out of touch, but peer recognition is always authentic.
It creates a web of mutual respect. But, recognition alone isn't enough to retain top talent. You have to pair it with the second pillar, which is autonomy. And the data here is striking. High performers are uniquely, almost violently sensitive to micromanagement.
Let me bring back my love for analogies to explain this one.
Please do.
Think of proper autonomy like this. It is giving a highly talented driver the final destination and letting them use their expertise to pick the best route to get there. Micromanaging is sitting in the passenger seat and randomly grabbing the steering wheel while they're going 65 on the highway. It's terrifying, it's annoying, and the driver's eventually going to pull over and just get out of the car.
That is exactly it. And to take your steering wheel analogy further, self-determination theory shows us that when the manager grabs that wheel, they aren't just annoying the driver. They are actively stripping away the driver's fundamental psychological need for competence.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the driver thinks, well, if you don't trust me to steer, why am I even in the car? This is why leaders must assign problems, not rigid tasks. When you assign a problem saying, here is our destination, here are the constraints we have to work within, what approach makes the most sense to you, you fulfill that human need for control.
Netflix actually codified this into their corporate culture with the mantra, context, not control.
Yes, a great example.
Managers are trained to provide deep, exhaustive context about the business goals, and then they completely step back and trust the employees to make the execution decisions. And because of this, their regretted attrition among high performers sits around 5%, which is remarkably low for the hyper-competitive tech sector.
Extremely low.
And then the company W.O. Gore takes this to an even greater extreme with radical self-managing teams where there are almost no traditional bosses, and their turnover runs consistently below 5% as well.
It's proof that autonomy works.
It totally makes sense for fixing the daily grind. But, if I have complete autonomy over my daily tasks and I'm getting recognized for my work, I might still start that passive job search if I look up after 3 years and realize I'm going to be doing the exact same thing 5 years from now.
Yes, career trajectory.
Right. How do companies prevent long-term stagnation once the daily experience is fixed. Because according to the source material, the traditional annual performance review is officially dead.
Oh, it is dead, and honestly for very good reason.
Thank goodness.
Infrequent development chats lead directly to the stagnation you just described. If a manager only talks to an employee about their career trajectory once every 12 months, the organization is sending a deafening signal that the employee's growth is simply not a priority.
You cannot steer a career looking at a map once a year.
Exactly. Major players like Deloitte, Adobe, and Microsoft have entirely dismantled traditional annual ratings. Microsoft uses a system called Perspectives, which focuses entirely on frequent, forward-looking check-ins. When conversations about future growth become a routine part of the weekly or monthly cadence rather than a rare, anxiety-inducing event, voluntary turnover drops significantly.
And this naturally transitions into one of my favorite structural fixes from the deep dive, which is the death of the exit interview in favor of the stay interview.
The stay interview is so powerful.
Right. Doing an exit interview is basically a corporate postmortem. The employee's relationship with the company is already dead and gone. You're just poking around trying to figure out what killed it. A stay interview is proactive medicine. You sit down with a high-performing current employee and figure out exactly what keeps them engaged and what frustrations might eventually push them away.
The Cisco example illustrates the power of this perfectly. Cisco was losing a troubling number of highly valuable sales engineers, so they implemented systematic stay interviews.
And what do they find?
Well, what they uncovered was completely invisible in their exit data. These engineers loved the technology and felt technically stagnant, but the company kept aggressively pushing them onto a management track. It's a classic corporate blunder, taking a technical wizard and forcing them to manage people, which they didn't actually want to do.
The only way up was to stop doing the thing they were actually good at.
Precisely. Once Cisco understood this through the stay interviews, they created entirely new technical advancement paths that offered prestige and higher pay without requiring the engineer to manage a team. As a direct result, retention in that group improved by an astounding 12 points.
The Cleveland Clinic did the exact same thing to retain their nursing staff. The stay interviews revealed a massive generational divide in the psychological contract.
Oh, right, the generational difference.
Yeah, early career nurses desperately wanted intense mentorship and rapid skill development. But mid-career nurses, who already had the skills, cared way more about schedule flexibility and autonomy over their shifts. You simply cannot fix a retention problem if you are applying a one-size-fits-all solution to a diverse workforce.
You really can't.
But thinking about the stay interview, if a manager sits an employee down and says, "Hey, what would make you leave us?" Isn't there a massive risk that the manager is just planting the idea of quitting right into the employee's head?
This raises an important question, and it is overwhelmingly the most common fear managers have about this practice. But the behavioral data is clear. The thought is already in their head.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. The passive job search we talked about earlier is likely already running in the background. Asking the question doesn't plant a seed. It brings a seed that is already growing out of the shadows. Furthermore, it builds immense trust. It proves to the employee that their manager is brave enough to hear an uncomfortable, honest answer and invested enough in their future to actually try and fix it.
It's hard to imagine a stronger signal of psychological safety than a boss asking, "How can I make sure you don't want to leave me?"
Exactly.
So we know the behaviors that work. Autonomy, immediate peer recognition, frequent career mapping, stay interviews. But how does a massive global corporation actually scale that level of empathy? You can't just cross your fingers and hope you've hired naturally empathetic managers. It has to be baked into the very DNA of the company.
That is the final and arguably most difficult piece of the retention puzzle. You scale it by recalibrating the psychological contract openly and supporting it with hard systems and data. Look at Costco.
Okay, Costco.
The retail industry is notorious for brutal, churning turnover. But Costco maintains a turnover rate of around 6%.
Wow, for retail that is insanely low.
Right, and why? Because they are explicitly clear about the contract from day one. They pay significantly above industry norms, and they aggressively promote from within. But in exchange, they demand extremely high performance and constant cross-training flexibility. They lay out exactly what the transactional relationship is, and they fiercely protect their end of the bargain. There is no ambiguity to cause a breach of contract.
Marriott International takes a slightly different approach with their Take Care program.
Yeah.
They realized they had to literally teach empathy. They trained their frontline hospitality managers, so the people overseeing housekeeping and food service, in these exact retention behaviors. They teach them how to actively listen, how to conduct a stay interview, how to grant autonomy to a housekeeper. But they don't just teach it. They tie it to the manager's scorecards.
That's the kicker.
Right. If your team is miserable and quitting, your scorecard reflects it and your compensation is impacted. By operationalizing empathy, they drop turnover by 7 to 12%.
And then you have the purely data-driven approach, like Google's GDNA early warning system. Google's people analytics team found that looking at any single metric wasn't enough to predict if someone was going to quit.
Just one number wouldn't do it.
Right. But they discovered that if you look at a specific composite of data, for instance, when an employee's expected promotion timing is delayed and their manager's quality rating is low and their routine engagement scores dip, that specific combination is incredibly predictive.
Because if a promotion is delayed, you might just be annoyed. But if your promotion is delayed and your manager is unsupportive, you suddenly feel completely trapped. Your brain goes into flight mode.
Exactly. The composite reveals the compounding effect of barriers. Google's system flags this specific combination, allowing leadership to intervene with a stay interview or development chat long before the employee ever replies to a recruiter on LinkedIn. They use data to catch the passive job search before it begins.
So what does this all mean? We have dug through this incredible corporate data from Google, Costco, the Mayo Clinic, Cisco. If you are listening to this right now, whether you manage a massive team or you are an individual contributor trying to navigate your own career path, how do you practically apply all this workplace psychology tomorrow morning?
Well, the ultimate takeaway is that you must treat retention, both keeping your team and protecting your own engagement, as a daily practice, not an episodic crisis response. If you are a leader, your mandate tomorrow is to actively listen.
Actively listen.
Right. It is to grant appropriate autonomy by assigning complex problems instead of rigid tasks, and to recognize discretionary effort immediately. If you are an employee, your task is to figure out what your own psychological contract actually requires. What specific things do you need to feel valued and secure?
You have to know your own needs.
Exactly. And once you know, you have to voice it. Do not wait for an exit interview to tell your boss what would have made you stay.
I think that is incredibly empowering. We've taken quite a journey today. We've learned that people don't just wake up one day and suddenly quit. They fade away.
Yeah, they do.
They fade away due to 1,000 tiny micro moments of poor communication, a lack of autonomy, and an invisible path to growth. Whether you are running a Fortune 500 team or just evaluating your own daily job satisfaction, these small daily interactions are the true underlying currency of the workplace.
They are the foundation, and when the daily interactions fail, the whole structure eventually collapses, no matter how much you pay people.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with. We've spent this entire deep dive talking about human interactions, psychological contracts, and the need to feel heard. But we are moving rapidly into an era where artificial intelligence and automation are continuing to absorb our routine technical tasks.
Absolutely.
So as the spreadsheets, the coding, and the data entry get handed over to machines, will these deeply human micro interactions, how a manager makes you feel valued, heard, and trusted on a random Tuesday morning, will that become the absolute only true competitive advantage an organization has left to keep its best minds?
It is a profound shift to consider. As the technical work commoditizes, the human element becomes the premium.
Something for you to mull over. Maybe check on those unwashed dishes in your own psychological contract before they pile up too high. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll leave you with that lingering question to explore on your own.